In 2025, Kawasaki, Ducati, and Harley-Davidson issued safety recalls for some of their most popular motorcycles. Then all three had to issue second recalls because the first fixes failed. Nearly 20,000 Kawasaki Ninja ZX-6R sport bikes were grounded with do not ride orders. Ducati Panigale V4 superbikes went back to the dealer twice for the same melting brake hose. And Harley-Davidson discovered that the replacement parts in their Sportster S recall kits were themselves defective. 3 brands, 3 countries, 3 completely different mechanical failures, and the same result every time. The recall did not work. We examined NHTSA filings, engineering teardown data, owner forums, and legal investigations to determine exactly what went wrong. This report explains how each failure happened, why the initial fixes failed, and what it means if you ride any of these bikes. In July 2024, a European rider reported that his Kawasaki Ninja ZX-6R suffered a catastrophic engine failure. The number 5 crankshaft bearing shell, which sits at the transmission end of the crank deep inside the engine cases, had seized onto the crankshaft journal and become tangled in the cam chain. The engine was completely destroyed. More reports followed from American riders experiencing the same failure on their ZX-6R motorcycles. Kawasaki's engineering team at the Akashi factory in Japan pulled engine control unit data from the failed bikes, saw load patterns resembling modified or heavily used engines, and spent the next 10 months unable to pin the failures on a single manufacturing cause. The engine control unit data complicated the investigation, pointing in conflicting directions while more bikes failed in the field. It was not until May 2025 that Kawasaki engineers finally reproduced a number 5 bearing shell seizure on a completely stock engine in their controlled testing facility. No aftermarket parts, no tuning, no modifications of any kind. Just a bone stock Ninja ZX-6R straight off the Kawasaki production line, tearing itself apart from the inside. Nearly 10 months had passed since that first European failure report. The root cause was something that should have been caught before a single motorcycle left the factory floor. During assembly, the crankcase bolts that clamped the engine's 2 case halves together were being torqued beyond their design specification. They were over-torqued at the factory. Too much clamping force squeezed the engine cases together. To understand why this defect is so dangerous, here is what happens inside that 636 cubic centimeter inline-4 engine when the crankcase bolts are tightened past specification. The ZX-6R engine spins its crankshaft past 13,000 revolutions per minute at peak power, and the red line sits above 16,000 revolutions per minute. That is more than 266 revolutions every single second. The crankshaft journals ride on plain metal bearing shells, and the oil clearance between the spinning journal and the stationary bearing surface is engineered to somewhere between 38 and 76 microns. For reference, the average human hair is about 70 microns thick. The gap keeping the crankshaft spinning freely at 16,000 revolutions per minute is roughly the width of a single hair. That microscopic gap is maintained by what engineers call a hydrodynamic oil film. Pressurized engine oil is forced into the clearance space and creates a thin cushion of fluid that keeps the 2 metal surfaces from ever touching. As long as that oil film holds, the engine runs perfectly. The crankshaft floats on a layer of oil thinner than a sheet of paper. When the crankcase bolts are over-torqued, the 2 case halves compress further together than designed. This squeezes the bearing saddle at the number 5 position into a slightly oval shape, crushing the oil clearance below the minimum threshold. The oil film breaks down, metal touches metal, friction generates extreme heat in milliseconds. Thermal expansion closes the remaining gap even further. The bearing material can seize onto the crankshaft journal. For the rider, this feels like somebody flipped an off switch on the engine. One moment you're riding your Kawasaki Ninja ZX-6R at highway speed, and the next moment you have 0 power. No warning knock, no vibration, no temperature gauge spike. Nothing. The NHTSA filing specifically states there is no warning that may occur prior to this problem presenting itself. On a sport bike leaned over in a corner or merging onto a highway, the consequences are genuinely life-threatening. A seized crankshaft can lock or violently slow the rear wheel through the transmission and chain drive, causing violent fishtailing or an instant high-side crash. The ZX-6R does have a slipper clutch that might provide some protection, but when a crankshaft seizes at 13,000 revolutions per minute, the forces are so sudden that rider reaction time basically does not exist. One report from a dealer mechanic on ZX forums described a catastrophic failure at approximately 5,700 miles on the odometer. The number 5 main bearing shell fractured, got caught in the timing chain gear, jumped timing by 180 degrees, bent all 16 valves, scored all 4 pistons, and cracked the crankcase casting. Over $12,000 in parts alone, and Kawasaki does not supply complete replacement engine assemblies to dealers, making the repair incredibly slow and complex. Kawasaki's own filing with NHTSA admitted that this was surprising because the company has specific procedures in place to prevent this exact problem from occurring. So the system they built to prevent over-torquing somehow failed across 2 full years of production, from April 2023 through April 2025. That is a quality control breakdown on a massive scale. On June 4, 2025, Kawasaki filed NHTSA recall number 25 V376. It covered 17,792 motorcycles across the 2024 and 2025 Ninja ZX-6R lineup. Every variant was included, from the base model to the KRT edition to the 40th anniversary. The fix seemed straightforward. Dealers would inspect the crankcase bolts, retorque them to the correct specification, and replace any bearing shells showing abnormal wear. By October 2025, dealers had completed repairs on 11,019 of the affected motorcycles. Problem fixed. Riders could breathe again. That was only round 1. In July 2025, barely 1 month after the Kawasaki recall launched, a Ninja ZX-6R that had already been through the complete dealer repair experienced another number 5 bearing failure while riding. Then a second repaired bike failed, then a third, then a fourth. And Kawasaki was not the only brand watching a recall fix fall apart that summer. Months earlier, Ducati had already gone through the same experience with the Panigale V4. Back in January 2025, while Kawasaki was still trying to figure out why ZX-6R engines were seizing, Ducati had filed NHTSA recall 25V013, covering approximately 592 units of the 2025 Panigale 5.4 and Vi4S. These are $30,000 plus Italian superbikes, the absolute pinnacle of production sport bike engineering. The rear brake hose was routed too close to the searing hot exhaust manifolds, and the thermal shield designed to protect that hose was incorrectly positioned at the Ducati factory. Over time and repeated heat cycles, exhaust temperatures degraded the brake hose material from the outside in, creating a risk of sudden total loss of rear brake function on one of the fastest production motorcycles in the world. Ducati's fix seemed straightforward. Dealers would reposition the heat-reflective sheath and secure it with additional fasteners specified in the recall procedure. Problem identified, solution deployed. That repair lasted about 3 weeks. On February 8th, a Ducati Panigale 5.4 that had already received the recall fix came back with a failed brake line. The combination of extreme exhaust temperatures and the intense hydraulic pressure generated during hard braking overwhelmed the repositioned sheath. Repositioning the heat shield alone was not enough to protect a brake line from a 1,000-degree exhaust manifold on a motorcycle designed to be ridden at 9/10 on a track. So by summer 2025, 2 major manufacturers had deployed recall fixes that did not hold, but the motorcycle world was about to get a third. In September 2025, Harley-Davidson filed NHTSA recall 25V590, covering 8,422 units of the 2021 through 2025 Sportster S. The Sportster S represented Harley-Davidson's move into modern performance motorcycles. It uses a liquid-cooled Revolution Max engine on a completely redesigned platform. The defect was in one of the most safety-critical components on the front end. The upper triple clamp on the Harley-Davidson Sportster, the structural component connecting the front fork tubes to the steering stem, could fracture under extreme loading conditions. If that part cracks while you are riding, the rider could lose steering control. 6 warranty claims and 1 crash with minor injuries had already been documented. The triple clamp was manufactured by a third-party supplier specializing in magnesium alloy castings, and the remedy was straightforward. Owners were advised to have the clamp swapped for a redesigned version with reinforced ribs, part number 459000365A. So by September 2025, here is where the scoreboard stood. Kawasaki had recalled the ZX-6R in June, and post-repair failures started in July. Ducati had recalled the Panigale V4 in January, and the fix had failed by February. And Harley-Davidson had just recalled the Sportster S. Three of the biggest names in motorcycling, all running active recalls at the same time. If you are finding this useful, or if you own one of these bikes, hit subscribe. I cover motorcycle news, recalls, and industry investigations every week. All right, so here is where things get really messy. While Kawasaki was dealing with post-repair failures, their engineers bought back several engines, shipped them across the Pacific Ocean to the Akashi factory in Japan, tore them apart, and discovered something that should have been predicted from the very beginning. The torque readings on the repaired engines were within specification. The bolts were tightened to exactly the right number, and the axial clamping force on the crankcase was still excessive. Torque tightening alone could not reliably control the clamping force in this case. When a mechanic uses a torque wrench, that wrench measures rotational resistance, how hard it is to turn the bolt. What it does not measure is the actual clamping force being applied to the crankcase halves. Variations in the crankcase mating surface finish, the orientation of the washers, and even slight irregularities in the washer shape meant that identical torque readings could produce wildly different clamping forces. The same torque value that produced safe clearance on one engine could crush the bearing on the next one. Kawasaki's first recall essentially told dealers to use the same type of measurement that had failed at the factory, just more carefully, and it still did not work. On November 18, 2025, Kawasaki pulled the emergency brake. They issued a stop sale and stop delivery order to every authorized Kawasaki dealer in the United States. No more selling ZX-6R motorcycles. No more deliveries. Every unsold bike on every dealer floor across the country was grounded where it sat. The formal NHTSA filing for the second recall, number 25 V798, came on December 9, 2025. The recall expanded to cover 2024, 2025, and now 2026 model year ZX-6R motorcycles, approximately 20,301 units. The 2026 models were added for the first time, meaning Kawasaki had continued building and shipping bikes even after the first recall confirmed a factory defect. The new remedy threw out the torque wrench entirely. Kawasaki now requires the angle tightening method, which geometrically measures actual bolt rotation and stretch rather than relying on resistance. This provides precise control over axial clamping force regardless of surface variations or washer conditions. Every single ZX-6R, including those already repaired under the first recall, must be retightened using this method. A white identification mark gets stamped on the right crankcase cover after completion. On the owner forums, the reaction was exactly what you would expect. On ZX6R.com, one buyer described being mid-purchase at a Kawasaki dealership when the stop sale order hit. Financing approved, handshake done, about to ride home. The dealer system froze the sale. He got his $1,000 deposit back, drove to a different dealership, and bought a ZX-10R instead because he refused to accept a new bike that had had open heart surgery before he ever got to ride it. On ZXforums.com, European owners reported their own confusion. A Spanish rider was told by his local dealer that the recall did not apply in Europe, only to confirm directly with Kawasaki Spain that his vehicle identification number was affected. Others adopted gallows humor, ZX-6R, where the R stands for recall. Some riders admitted they were still commuting on affected bikes because they simply had no other way to get to work. And meanwhile, the legal pressure was building. Gerard Sharp, a nationally recognized class action law firm based in San Francisco, launched a lawsuit investigation on June 10, 2025, actively soliciting ZX-6R owners who experienced engine power loss. A separate class action had already been filed against Kawasaki over the unrelated 2025 KX450 primary gear recall. As of early 2026, no formal class action has been filed specifically for the ZX-6R, but the investigation remains active. Then December 2025 delivered the third gut punch. A Harley-Davidson dealer cracked open one of those Sportster S recall kits and found the old defective triple clamp sitting inside instead of the corrected replacement part. Harley-Davidson immediately halted all kit shipments and inspected their inventory. Some kits contained the completely wrong part number, and some kits with the supposedly correct new part number, the part number 459000365A, had casting anomalies in the reinforcement ribs. Those ribs had been specifically redesigned and added to prevent the cracking that caused the recall in the first place. Both problems traced back to the same third-party supplier. The supplier also produces magnesium castings for several global automotive manufacturers. So within a span of about 10 months, from February 2025 through December 2025, all 3 recalls had failed. Kawasaki's torque-based retightening couldn't account for physical variability. Ducati's heat shield repositioning didn't survive real-world braking. And Harley-Davidson's supplier shipped parts that were either wrong or defective. Now here's where this stops being a story about 3 individual brands and starts being a story about the industry. In January 2026, Ducati filed its second recall, number 26V050, expanding coverage to approximately 1,440 units and adding the 2025 and 2026 Street Fighter V 4 and 5.4S for the first time. The new fix replaced the original repair approach with a larger, rigid, extended thermal shield manufactured by MPT Plastica in Italy. Every Panigale and Street Fighter previously repaired under the first recall needs to go back to the dealer for the upgraded component. In February 2026, Harley-Davidson filed its second recall, number 26V075, expanding to 8,498 Sportster S motorcycles and 903 replacement kits, for a combined total of 9,401 affected items. Every Sportster S previously fixed under the first recall now needs reinspection. Motorcycle.com journalist Dennis Chung, covering the Harley recall, explicitly called out a troubling trend of second recalls correcting failed first fixes across all 3 brands. Total Motorcycle compiled a comprehensive recall tracking list spanning KTM, Honda, BMW, Triumph, and others, documenting what they described as a global pattern of mechanical and electrical vulnerabilities across the industry. Top Speed noted that massive recalls from Japanese manufacturers known for reliability are exceptionally rare, making Kawasaki's situation all the more striking. This is the part that should concern riders beyond just these 3 models. The pattern here is not about bolts or brake hoses or triple clamps. The pattern is about quality assurance systems failing twice. In every case, the manufacturer identified a real defect, designed a corrective action, deployed it through their dealer network, and then discovered that the corrective action itself was inadequate or compromised. That's not a parts problem. That's a process problem. And it didn't happen at one company making one mistake. It happened at 3 companies on 3 continents within the same 12-month window. Motorcycles have gotten dramatically more sophisticated in the last decade. Ride-by-wire throttle bodies, inertial measurement units, cornering ABS, and traction control systems are layered on top of engines built to tighter tolerances than ever before. The engineering is genuinely incredible, but some analysts argue the quality control systems that are supposed to catch manufacturing errors before bikes reach customers may be struggling to keep pace with that complexity. And when the recalls themselves are failing, it raises a question about the entire self-certification model that the industry depends on. And there's a supply chain dimension that deserves attention. Kawasaki's torque procedures failed at their own factory. Ducati's thermal shielding was inadequate from their own design team. And in Harley-Davidson's case, the third-party supplier responsible for the original defective component also produced the replacement parts, which introduced their own quality concerns. These are systemic issues that go beyond any single brand. If you own any of the affected bikes, here is exactly what you need to do. For Kawasaki ZX-6R owners, do not ride your motorcycle until the second recall repair using the angle tightening method has been completed by an authorized Kawasaki dealer. This applies even if your bike already went through the first recall, because the torque-based repair has been proven insufficient. Use the NHTSA recall lookup tool at nhtsa.gov and enter your VIN to check your bike's current status. For Ducati Panigale 5.4 or Street Fighter V 4 owners, contact your Ducati dealer about the updated rigid thermal shield. If your bike had the first recall repair performed, the original fix has been superseded. You need the second upgraded repair. For Harley-Davidson Sportster S owners, contact your dealer and confirm that any replacement triple clamp installed on your motorcycle is the correct revised part number with properly formed reinforcement ribs. If you have not had the recall performed yet, ask your dealer to physically verify their part stock before scheduling the work. Because of documented issues with replacement kits, do not assume that a completed recall means a safe repair. Always check the part number yourself, and confirm the part matches the official recall bulletin before you ride. So where does this go from here? Based on the NHTSA filings, the legal activity, and the industry response so far, here is what I think happens next. Kawasaki will likely complete the second round of ZX-6R repairs through the first half of 2026. But the Gerard Sharp investigation and the broader legal attention around Kawasaki's quality control practices suggests some form of settlement or owner compensation program is probable before the end of the year. The angle tightening method should actually solve the clamping force problem this time, because it addresses the fundamental physics that the torque method could not control. The question is whether the reputational damage to the ZX-6R nameplate becomes permanent. Kawasaki has spent decades building trust as the reliable Japanese manufacturer. 2 years of defective production followed by a failed recall fix is the kind of story that sticks in buyers' minds when they are standing in a dealership choosing between a ZX-6R and a Yamaha R6. Ducati's rigid thermal shield should hold where the repositioned sheath did not, because it addresses the root cause rather than just rearranging the same inadequate component. But the bigger story for Ducati is whether the exhaust routing on the new generation Panigale V4 platform gets redesigned entirely for future model years. Patching a fundamentally tight packaging layout with bigger shields is a band-aid, not a cure. If a third brake hose recall appears on the Panigale platform, the conversation shifts from manufacturing quality to design decisions. For Harley-Davidson, the supplier qualification question is the one to watch. When your recall depends on parts from the same supplier whose quality control failed the first time, the logical next step is secondary sourcing or bringing the component manufacturing in-house. Whether that investment gets made will say a lot about how the company approaches supplier management going forward. And the larger industry question is whether NHTSA starts requiring more rigorous pre-deployment validation of recall remedies before they are rolled out to dealer networks. Right now, manufacturers self-certify that their fixes work. 3 brands proving unable to self-certify successfully in the same year is exactly the kind of pattern that attracts regulatory attention. If NHTSA proposes mandatory pre-delivery recall verification, or even a random audit program for completed recall repairs, 2025 will be the year that triggered it. The underlying pressure driving all of this, quarterly production targets, lean supply chains, and the race to hit dealer delivery windows is not going away. If anything, it is intensifying as manufacturers compete for market share in a flat global motorcycle market. The only thing that changes this equation is riders demanding better. And that starts with paying attention to exactly the kind of pattern we just walked through. As of early 2026, all 3 recall situations remain active and unresolved for thousands of riders. The Kawasaki dealer network is working through a backlog of nearly 20,000 motorcycles that need the updated angle tightening procedure. Ducati owners are being called back in for the second thermal shield upgrade, and Harley-Davidson dealers are re-inspecting every Sportster S they have already worked on. Law firms are circling Kawasaki. Forums across all 3 brands are full of frustrated riders asking the same question. When I drop this kind of money on a motorcycle, should not the recall at least work the first time? The answer, apparently, is not always. And whether that changes depends on whether riders, regulators, and the press treat 2025 as an anomaly or the beginning of a trend that demands a different standard of accountability.